Lecture 3. Theme: Anglo-Saxon tribes. The development of the feudal system. Aim: to give students the information about Anglo-Saxon tribes and the division of Britain into 7 kingdoms. Plan of the lecture. The Anglo-Saxon Settlement. Anglo-Saxon England. The division into 7 kingdoms. The Anglo-Saxon Settlement. Many people today still call the period between the departure of the Romans in the 400s and the invasion of the Normans in 1066 the Dark Ages. This is because few reliable historical records of these times exist, and our knowledge of them is therefore limited. Romanized Celtic leaders operated the Roman system of local government until about 446, when they made a final, fruitless appeal to Rome for protection. From then onwards, power fell more and more into the hands of local chiefs. From time to time, some of them established a lordship over others. Tradition says that one such overlord, Vortigern, controlled an area from Kent to South Wales. The Anglo-Saxon raids continued. These raids were part of a general migration of Germanic tribes in search of new land for their increasing population. During the 5th century, a number of tribes from the northwestern European mainland invaded and settled in Britain in large numbers. These tribes were the Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes. The Jutes and the Angles came from the Jutland Peninsula, today southern Denmark. The Saxons arrived from the territory between the Rhine and Elbe rivers, northern Germany. At first they came as mercenaries hired by Celtic tribal chiefs who fought one against the other, then seeing that the country was weak to defend itself, they came in great numbers, conquering it altogether. Tradition says that the Anglo-Saxon settlement of England began in 449, when Vortigern invited 2 Jutish chiefs, Hengist and Horsa, to help him defend Kent against invading tribes. Hengist and Horsa later rebelled against Vortigern. Horsa died in battle, but Hengist and his descendants eventually conquered Kent, Sussex, Hampshire, and the Isle of Wight by about 550. The Angles occupied the central part of southern Britain and the northern and eastern coasts. The Saxons settled around the River Thames. They advanced westwards to the Bristol Channel by 577 and to the Irish Sea by 613. By then, almost all of present-day England was under Anglo-Saxon rule. Quite soon the country began to be called the Land of the Angles, later England, and as you easily see, England. Pause. 2. In the west of the country, their advance was temporarily halted by an army of Celtic Britons under the command of the legendary King Arthur. Nevertheless, by the end of the 6th century, the Anglo-Saxons and their way of life predominated in nearly all of England and in parts of southern Scotland. Wherever the Anglo-Saxon settlers went, they displaced the local Romanized Celtic Britons, forcing them northwards and westwards into present-day Scotland and Wales. Some Britons took refuge in Cornwall or across the Channel in Brittany. In the 500s and 600s, the Angles made gains in Scotland and captured the land between Wales and the Celtic kingdom of Strathclyde. In the 700s, Offa, king of Mercia, built a defensive dike that defined the English boundary with Wales. The Anglo-Saxons and Jutes were close to each other in speech and customs, and they gradually formed into one people referred to as the Anglo-Saxons. For a long time the tribes fought with one another for supreme power. Anglo-Saxon England. Altogether, 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms developed in England: East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Mercia, Northumbria, Sussex, and Wessex. By the early 600s, Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex dominated the other four kingdoms. In the 700s, Mercia had important commercial and diplomatic links with Europe. In the 800s, Wessex became the politically dominant kingdom. Egbert, its king, conquered the Welsh of Cornwall in 815. In 825, he defeated Mercia and seized Mercia's subject kingdoms of Kent and Sussex. In 827, Egbert forced Mercia and Northumbria to accept his overlordship. After 827, local kings still ruled in East Anglia, Mercia, and Northumbria, but Egbert claimed to rule the whole of England. Egbert's successors include Alfred the Great, one of England's most significant early monarchs. Alfred was a great statesman, general, and man of letters. He wrote and translated books, opened schools, formed laws, and helped to found England's navy. Among Alfred's descendants were two more outstanding kings. Athelstan, who ruled from 924 to 939, was acknowledged as overlord by the Danes and by the Celts of Scotland and Wales. Edgar the Peaceful, who reigned from 959 to 975, reformed the laws and coinage and founded religious institutions. Anglo-Saxon life. The Anglo-Saxons made little use for towns and cities. They had a great effect on countryside, where they introduced new farming methods and founded thousands of self-sufficient villages which formed the basis of English society for the next thousands or so years. The earliest Anglo-Saxon kings were military leaders who ruled with the aid of thanes, lords. The Anglo-Saxons settled in small tribal villages or townships of timber huts thatched with straw, reeds, or heather. By the 800s, village life had become more organized. The Anglo-Saxon kings had allotted land to their thanes and had made them overlords of some villages. Villagers became dependent on their thane and had to give him food and labor. Saxon villages consisted of about 20 to 30 families, all faithful to their leader. Local rules were made by the moot, which was a small meeting held on a grassy hill or under a tree. Sometimes it judged cases between the people of the village. The many villages were, as time went by, grouped into hundreds, and the hundreds were grouped into shires. Each hundred had an open-air court of justice, and the judges were called aldermen. Important cases were judged by the sheriff of shire or by a king's representative called a reeve. These cases were discussed at a shire moot or meeting, which was a kind of local parliament, which met usually twice a year. The king's council was called the witan, which was a kind of parliament of wise nobles and clergy. The witan advised the king and was the highest law court. It could make laws and choose, or elect new kings. The Anglo-Saxon peoples spoke languages belonging to the Germanic group of languages. The speech of the Anglo-Saxons predominated in England and formed the basis from which the English language developed. The Anglo-Saxons were pagans and worshipped different gods, the sun, the moon, and such nature gods as Odin, Woden, and Thor. Their names are reflected in the names of the days of the week. Tyr, Tuesday, was the god of war. Woden, Wednesday, was the supreme god and the god of kings. Thor, Thursday, was the god of storm. Frigga, Friday, Woden's wife, was the goddess of nature and of love. Saint Augustine, a missionary from Rome, brought Christianity to the Anglo-Saxons in the south. He converted Kent in the late 590s and founded the Church of England in 597. Self-control questions. What tribes from the northwestern European mainland invaded and settled in Britain in the 5th century? whose way of life predominated in nearly all of England by the end of the 6th century? What kingdom became politically dominant? What was Alfred the Great?